of feverish political activity. Left-wing politics were allowed but discouraged by the right-wing government and the royalty. On January 1961, Andreas Papandreou returned to his native Greece after more than 20 years in America with his American wife and 4 American-born children.
We had problems, first of all, in making a decision to leave the United States and to come to Greece. It was a shift from an academic career in one country and a political career in another country. That's a pretty big jump, because he had pretty much decided he was focusing on an academic career in America. So we came with a certain amount of excitement. It was a new phase. We didn't know what the future was going to be. Certainly we came, I think, with the notion that we could contribute something to the country. Andreas perhaps with less certainty that he would be able to make changes that he wanted to.
In 1961, Greek politics became increasingly acrimonious. The right-wing government, the palace, and the Americans were worried at the rise of the Center Union, led by the father of Andreas, George Papandreou, believing it to be influenced by the outlawed communists. The Center Union, on the other hand, demonized the right as repressive. Passions on both sides were high.
Το 1961, θορυβημένο το δεξιό κατεστημένο από την άνοδο και της Ένωσης Κέντρου και της κεντροαριστεράς, θα λέγαμε ευρύτερα, προέβη στις εκλογές βίας και νοθείας που αμέσως κατήγγειλε ο Γεώργιος Παπανδρέου τότε, ο πατέρας του Ανδρέα, και με αφορμή αυτή κήρυξε τον λεγόμενο ανένδοτο αγώνα, την πορεία δηλαδή προς τον λαό για να τον συσπυρώσει και για να αντιδράσει απέναντι σε αυτό το αποτέλεσμα όπως είχε νοθευθεί από τότε εξουσία, για να ανατρέψει δηλαδή αυτό το αποτέλεσμα. Νομίζω πως αυτό ήταν και το σημαντικότερο ερέθισμα, η σημαντικότερη αφορμή για να πάρει την μεγάλη απόφαση του Ανδρέας Παπανδρέου, που μέχρι τότε ταλανιζόταν στο τι θα κάνει, να συμμετάσχει ενεργά στην πολιτική ζωή του τόπου.
In November 1963, Andreas's father George was elected Prime Minister of a centrist government at 72 years old. The political scene became worse. The elder Papandreou repeatedly clashed with the king.
The real, let's say, conflict came at the time George Papandreou was thrown out by the king. Then there was a lot of tumult and a lot of dissatisfaction among the population, with the people and with the party. And Andreas, I think, took a much stronger stand on how this should be dealt with.
The father also clashed with his son, who was impatient with his cautious, pro-Western and anti-communist policies.
But the conflict had perhaps something to do with generation. It had something to do with the culture that Andreas had lived in after he left Greece for so many years, and perhaps the changing of his own ideas toward a more maybe progressive orientation.
Μετά την θριαμβευτική του εκλογή ως βουλευτή Αχαΐας το 1964, είχε πια και τις πρώτες κυβερνητικές εμπειρίες, είτε από τη θέση του Υπουργού Προεδρίας και αργότερα από την θέση του αναπληρωτή Υπουργού Συντονισμού, όπου είχε την πρώτη δυνατότητα και ευκαιρία να εφαρμόσει στην πράξη τις σύγχρονες ιδέες για την οικονομική ανάπτυξη και τον εξυγχρονισμό που χρειαζόταν τότε η Ελλάδα.
Andreas wanted a radical break with America and the monarchy. The Americans, the Greek conservatives, were becoming alarmed. In the early morning of the 21st of April 1967, a group of officers seized power in a coup.
I remember 1 week before, exactly 1 week before the 21st of April, 2 elderly ladies came to the door. I was alone with my brothers and sister at home. I opened up the door and they said, "We're coming from Washington and we want to tell you that we have news from our relative in Washington, a Greek American, that within the next week there will be a dictatorship." I remember telling my father, and he slept away from the house over the next few days, but that day he had a meeting early in the morning with an advisor to the king. And so he said it couldn't be a dictatorship because the king would be behind the dictatorship, and therefore he wouldn't do that the day that I'm going to meet his advisor. Well, in fact, there was the colonels, a lower rung in the army, that took over at that night.
One of their prime targets was Andrέas Papandreou. He and his family were asleep when an armed squad came to arrest him.
And we heard some pounding on the door and screaming and shouting. Our first instinct was to go higher up, upstairs.
And I hoisted my father up. I helped him up to get on the top of that roof where he could hide.
They asked me where Andreas was, and I said, he's not here.
He came to me. The sergeant put a Tommy gun to my throat, and he said, I'll kill you if you don't tell us where your father is. And immediately then I said, well, my father is at my grandfather's house, George Papandreou, which is another part of Athens.
And they asked him again, and Andreas was lying on a platform up above the terrace. And he heard that they threatened George, and he stood up and he said, don't shoot, I'm coming down.
Andreas moved to a prison to await trial on charges of high treason connected with the army conspiracy.
I could see him at certain times of the week, and he was behind a very heavy screen. I could just see a shadow. I could hardly make out his profile or his eyes. It was a very trying time. Andreas was in absolute isolation. He could see the children on Saturdays for about 15 minutes. Otherwise, he had no contact with the outside world.
Just before Christmas 1967, the military regime felt secure enough to order a general amnesty of political detainees. Andreas hardly dared believe his good luck. 2 weeks later, the regime, prodded by the Americans, gave Andreas a passport. Early in the morning of the 15th of January 1968, the family were on a plane to Paris.
He lived through the May '68 in Paris, the movements, the student movements, the anti-Vietnam movements, many of the liberation movements. He was very much in contact with a number of intellectuals, progressive, left-wing thinkers around the world. The Sweezy, Galton, Cardozo, Marcuse were people he read very much. And of course in touch with many of the left and socialist parties all over the world.
The next dramatic chapter of Andreas' life was about to begin at the age of 49 years old. During the junta, Andreas' experiences in jail had radicalized him. From a center leftist academic, he became a fiery militant.
I think what radicalized him was the fact that democracy was so easily overthrown or undermined in a night.
Soon after his self-exile, he formed what he called the Pan-Hellenic Resistance Movement, known by its acronym of PAC.
Well, there were several PACs, you know. There was one PAC in Greece, there was another PAC in Germany, there was a PAC in the United Kingdom, and was the PAC in the United States. And the political views of those teams were not really converging. There were different views. But on the whole was a movement against dictatorship for the establishment of democracy in Greece and the promotion of a progressive political platform for the modernization and democratization of Greece.
He called me and he dictated to me the first statement. Andreas Papandreou was a big power. His voice could be heard all over the world. It was a very strong voice that would help all the Greeks. So really the Greeks fought against the regime, got under PAC and other organizations.
For 6 years, Andreas toured Europe and America, speaking out against the Greek colonels. He joined other leading Greek opponents of the regime, such as actress Melina Mercouri, in condemning the Greek regime and urging an international boycott of the country.
Boycott the junta! Isolate the junta!
The regime will crack up.
It was the Cold War, though, so the United States supported the Greek military regime as a bulwark against communism and not the socialist activists. One hot evening in July 1974, Andreas, like many other Greeks, were taken by surprise. The discredited military regime suddenly collapsed under the burden of growing unpopularity and a disastrous intervention in Cyprus. Almost overnight, parliamentary democracy returned to Greece.